Jeff, welcome to Locked In, man. We've been talking about doing this for a while now. Where do we connect? On LinkedIn, I think?
Probably, but I know a bunch of people who've been on your show.
Oh, awesome.
So everyone was kind of talking, you got to do Ian, you got to do Ian. I said, all right.
Yeah. And I think it was LinkedIn that we messaged on.
I think that's right.
I think it was.
Yeah.
And then I think you might be our first attorney that went to prison and is now an attorney again.
There's not that many of us.
It's very few, right?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
Michael Cohen's trying to do that. Or
I'm not sure what his story is, but there's virtually no one in the country who came out of prison and became a white-collar attorney. Mm. So, I have kind of like this cool place where, I have lived experience where I can relate to people. They get like the truth from me, which is rare for attorneys, which you probably know.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm super excited to dive in today.
Yeah.
I always start the last few episodes with these Magic Mind shots. If you want one, they're right there. It's a matcha energy drink.
Not for me.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to do this.
I'm 22 years sober.
There's no alcohol
I'm
in it.
very careful about what I put in my mouth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these things are great. They've been sending me them, and it's like a mind enhancer. Kind of keeps you focused, gives you a jolt of energy, and it doesn't leave you with like that hangover crash after. I'm not sure if you do energy drinks or not, but
no, but prison pretty much did that for me.
Did you used to eat like those protein energy bars in there?
Anything I could do to get protein in my body, I did in prison.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyone listening, check out Magic Mind. These things, they definitely help. And when I do these long interviews, and so I do like one a day now, it helps keep me focused and dialed in, which is great. Mm-hmm. So Jeff, did you grow up in New York or Florida where you live now?
I grew up in Long Island.
Okay.
And lived in the metro area for my entire life, except when I went off to college for a little while. And we moved to Florida about 1.5 years ago. But I'm kind of a Rye and Greenwicher at heart, and so Rye is kind of where I went down, and then afterwards Greenwich. So, that fact that your studio is right here and, I could get here from Greenwich now was pretty cool.
Did you guys grow up with money, you and your family?
No, not really money, but middle class, there was food on the table. My parents weren't really together for a lot of that time. And so it was kind of a weird situation. I got forced to be the man of the house way too early.
How many of you were there?
3 siblings, younger brother, younger sister.
And you were the oldest?
And I was the oldest. And I would say it affected them the most because I was older and I kind of went off to college, earlier. But, the one who, so the child who did the best out of all 3 wound up going to prison. So you can just figure out how they did.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's a lot of added unnecessary pressure from your parents splitting and having to become the man of the house?
Yeah, I think that's true. It was true then, and it's kind of lasted my entire life in terms of pressure to succeed, pressure to be a provider, certainly to be a patriarch, and then the years where I couldn't really be the patriarch because of all my criminal justice issues and things. And I didn't really know where that was going to go. But, God and the universe have been good to me. And maybe that's just because of the work I've done. I don't know. But I'm back in that position again. So it feels kind of good, Yeah. It feels good to actually be able to take care of people in a lot of different ways, but also like to be the patriarch of my family. It's nice. It's kind of, it feels right.
Yeah, I always talk about, I always talk to people curious about how it is for someone that's like a middle-aged person with a family and established life to go to prison and walk away from everything for that. I mean, that's got to be really tough.
If someone asked me which decade is the right decade to go away to prison, if you had to go to prison, which would be the right decade? I'm not sure I know the answer. Because maybe if you go early, then you have your whole life. But for me, I went to prison at 48 years old. And, you know, I only served 13 months in prison. And then, of course, there was halfway house and home confinement and probation. But, I had a career and skills that I could draw from that really helped me kind of navigate a lot of things, and then, of course, be able to help people with. But I don't know that was optimal. It just is what happened. So, thank God I've been able to use all that to be of service to people.
So where do you end up going to college?
I went to a state school, Brockport State College, which is out between Buffalo and in Rochester. And I just had my 50th high school reunion 2 nights ago. And I was shocked at how many people from my high school actually went to Brockport with me. And it was kind of like Long Island Jews wound up kind of funneling into upstate state schools. And there had to be 10 of us who went to Brockport. Not everybody graduated, not everybody stayed there, but it was kind of interesting.
And what was your major?
I was a business marketing major, economics, and I was definitely a duck out of water. I mean, because Brockport was mostly like a phys ed and fine arts school, and I got into better private schools, but my father had lost his business about a year before I went to college, and so I had to pay for it myself, make my own way. And that was the only state school that I'd applied to. So Brockport it was. And I made the best of it.
Did you have like a career in mind that you wanted to pursue?
I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I really didn't know what that meant. Because I didn't really know what being a lawyer meant other than kind of like being on TV. And so a lot of my college was geared towards how I was going to get into law school. And I did well enough on my boards, and after kind of a sluggish first year of college, mostly driven by partying too much, I got my shit together. And so you want to hear the story of how I got my shit together?
Yeah, tell us everything.
So I'm telling you, I'm sorry. It's like I have this tickle.
Oh, you're good.
I have this tickle. I'm sorry. So I'm partying my entire first semester of college, and it's clear like I was like on academic probation like almost immediately, because I was like loose, I was finally like on my own, but I knew this was like not right. So I went up early. In between the semesters, I went up early, and some of the people there were pretty wild. And so while I was up there a few days early before school was going to start, I dropped a hit of acid, and the Erie Canal ran right through the middle of the school, and that kind of shows you like what it was to be up in like the Rust Belt towns where time had kind of passed by, So I dropped this hit of acid, and I'm sitting by the Erie Canal, and I'm staring at my reflection in the Erie Canal for like 5 hours. And I'm talking to myself, and myself is talking back. And what I'm watching myself say, as I'm kind of hallucinating, is like, dude, get your shit together. Like, this is it. You only go through once. And whatever you want to do with your life, you've got to straighten yourself out now. And I guess I took it to heart, because from that moment on, like, straight A student.
Wow.
Yeah.
My cousin would appreciate you, because he does like the psychedelics and stuff, and he goes to secluded areas just to do his thinking and get his shit together and make his plans.
Oh, well, this isn't like mushrooms. I mean, this was like blotter acid back then, you know?
But it's still kind of the same.
Oh, yeah, a little bit. I guess it is. I don't know.
Effect
I'm 22 years sober now, so I'm not like into the whole new mushroom, new weed culture.
Yeah.
But back then, I only tripped 5 times in my life, and every one of them was an incredible experience. In fact, so incredible that I knew I could never do it again. You know, I would have definitely just like my addictive personality would have taken over. So I knew I had to stop.
It's cool to see that even lawyers partied in high school and college, which also makes you think that prosecutors did the same thing too.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody. When I sit down with people my age, I'm 68 now. So like when I sit down with people who are like 60s, 70s, there's like and remember it was pre-AIDS too. So we could talk and we'll kind of hit it off and everything. And it's just a countdown to how long it takes us to start talking about drugs and sex. And because we all shared that experience back then, especially growing up on Long Island.
Yeah, I bet. So what type of lawyer do you end up becoming after you go through law school?
At the time, first I went out on my own. I never worked for a firm. And I formed a firm around me. So at first it was anything that walked in the door. You know, I was a kid. But eventually it was mostly real estate and kind of sophisticated real estate refinancings. That was early co-op conversions in Manhattan. And then I moved the firm out of Manhattan and up to Westchester, where I had moved my family a few years before. And, you know, instead of being a small fish in a large pond in Manhattan, I was kind of a larger fish in a smaller pond, and it was just the afterburners kicked in. And I started just attracting much larger clients and becoming like their general counsels, and found my groove. And in some ways it was fantastic. I mean, I was intellectually interesting, and the people were very wealthy, and they were relying upon me, and I was developing a lot of expertise. You know, on the other hand, there were like crazy real estate families, and I was kind of like, you know, I was a fixer. I was like Michael Clayton from the George Clooney movie, you know, like, so it wasn't like just the businesses, it was also their lives. And so if I wasn't refinancing their businesses or helping them grow their businesses, I was also getting like phone calls in the middle of the night when one of their kids got pulled over, you know, racing their Porsche up 684, you know, with a bag of blow in the back seat. And then I had to go get him out of the trouble in the middle of the night. And my ex-wife, you know, the phone would ring, and my ex-wife would say, you know, she would look at me. I said, "Yeah, I got to go."
So you became kind of like one of those family attorneys that we kind of see a little bit.
I was definitely a wealthy family attorney, and there were a lot of benefits to that. It was very lucrative, but I was on call 24/7.
Now, back then, was it easier to start a practice versus now? Because I've heard it's like harder to come out of law school and start your own practice now.
You know, I don't know the answer to that. Back then, pre-social media, you know, there was still a lot of pounding the pavement, and it's an interesting problem. For those of you who are starting businesses now, when people took the effort to actually get in a car and drive to my office, or when I was still in the city, if they would, you know, get in the elevator and come up, and they would be sitting there, the closing rate was, I don't know, 98%, because they were there already, and they didn't want to have to go out and interview other lawyers, but now, because it's so easy just to connect with people on Zoom or whatever, there's a lot of tire kicking. And so the closing rate is way, way down. And so I don't know, you know, it's I'm not sure which one's easier or not. I mean, you can spread the word now for virtually no money.
Yeah.
Back then, there was a lot of going to conferences and going to lunches and dinners and things like that. I'm still a little bit of that, but I don't know what's easier. I mean, I think that I think if you can sell, if you can market, then you can pretty much do it in any environment.
Do you think the billboards actually help? I see so many lawyers advertise with billboards.
I don't know. It's not my area of law.
Yeah.
You know, like I deal almost exclusively with people who are going through white collar prosecutions. So I don't know if the billboards would help at all.
Well, even there are criminal defense attorneys on billboards.
But I don't think that's white collar driven.
Okay. Interesting.
But my niche is being general counsel to people who are going through these white collar issues. So I'm not a criminal lawyer, or at least I don't appear in court anymore. You know, I'm more of a consigliere type. You know, I take people under my wing, and the hole in the market really was that there was nobody specializing in all of these things that were kind of circling around people who were being prosecuted for white-collar crimes. Because when you think about it, they're going through divorces and bankruptcies and child estrangement and partnership dissolutions and all kinds of issues that circle. I mean, those issues are in some ways, they're bigger than the criminal issue. But nobody really understands all of it. Or if they do, it's just not an area of law anybody wanted to get involved in. And certainly none of them had the kind of lived experience I had, having gone to prison, and very few of them had recovery experience, you know, and so taken all together, it's just this cool package that people could relate to, and I knew that. I knew that.
It's almost like what the prison consultants have tried to become, but they didn't really were able to become. Like, because you actually are able to move the needle and have the experience and are able to make things happen, get the affairs, whereas a prison consultant doesn't normally do that.
You know, the thing is that lawyers, for them, pretty much will only talk to other lawyers. You don't have the respect of the legal community unless you're a lawyer, and you also don't have the confidentiality and privilege. So once I got my law license back, it just opened up my ability to really be of service and to help people. And all around the country, really all around the world, because I'm also dealing with people who are going through extradition issues and things like that.
Wow, I didn't even know this was like a role. This is pretty
I
fascinating.
didn't know either. I didn't know either until I started to get into it. And also there's been a lot of media around it, you know. So, you know, a few years ago, there was an article about me and about our white collar support group in the New Yorker. And so I can pretty much, my career trajectory and the trajectory of the white collar support group, you could pretty much divide into before New Yorker and after New Yorker. In fact, the first white collar conference I went to, the American Bar Association white collar conference I went to, was in Miami in 2021. And I had just gotten my law license back, and the New Yorker article had just come out. And so I went to this conference, and I was dressed up in a suit and everything. Not such a good suit. I couldn't afford one. but a suit. And there were people from big law firms, but there were probably 1,000 lawyers there, and I was scared to death. Like, I was a guy who'd been to prison, and I didn't know how I was going to be received. But I was in this white-collar committee, and maybe there are 30 people in the white-collar committee. And I show up, and when I tell you I was sweating bullets, I was, like, so scared. And most of the the lawyers, they're younger than me. You know, I'm already, like, you know, 60 some odd years old. And I go to this thing, and the chairperson of this room of 30 people basically says, all right, why don't we go around the room and introduce ourselves? And so one by one, people are saying their names, and they're saying the names of these large firms like Sherman Sterling, Skadden Arps, White & Case, Paul Weiss. And then it comes around to me in the circle, and I said, Jeff Grant, I went to prison for a white-collar crime, which was the truth. And with that, the chairman stood up and pointed right at me and said, "You're the guy from the New Yorker." And I said, yeah. And like everybody knew. And I'm thinking, here's my calling card. You know, it's like I've got something going that nobody else has. And maybe it's not something I wanted to have, but I've got it. So let me just make sure that I stay in that groove. And it's kind of worked out.
And that's so relatable to people coming out of prison. I mean, I found it. It took me 4 years of working at Whole Foods at a regular job to find it, but I found it, and here we are. Today's episode of Locked In is brought to you by Magic Mind, the world's first productivity shot. If you're like me, managing a packed schedule of interviews, editing, and planning, you know it's tough to stay focused and energized all day. That's where Magic Mind comes in. Made with natural ingredients, Magic Mind gives you sustained energy and helps reduce stress without the jitters or crashes from coffee. It's the ultimate productivity boost, and right now they are offering a limited deal you won't want to miss. You can get up to 48% of your first subscription or 20% off a one-time purchase with my code LOCK20 at checkout. Just head over to www.magicmind.com/lock to claim it. That's www.magicmind.com/locked and use code LOCK20 for serious savings. Whether you're looking to boost focus, get creative, or simply make it through the day with more energy, Magic Mind's got you covered. Try it out and see the difference it makes. Thank you again to Magic Mind for being a proud sponsor of Locked In, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
You know, when people said to me, "You should be on Ian's podcast," and I researched you, I said, like, you know, here's a guy who found a groove and wanted to, you know, leaned into it, and that's what I relate to, because anybody who has any degree of success post prison, I respect, and I'm gonna help in any way I possibly can, because it is hard enough to do it on your own. But if you got a community and you can find one another, you know that this is what kind of God, you know, this is the opening that God created for us.
Yeah, people need to hear those stories too, because for so long they've been so, like, you know, hidden. I mean, look at now, in recent times, they even like air like Robert Downey Jr.'s past because they use that as a redemption story.
Yeah.
But when we were growing up, there was no mention of his drug use or prison time or any of that. Tim Allen, same thing. He went to prison for drugs too.
You know, the whole way this happened really is that when my story is really 25, I'm 25 years into my story. So think about how many of my earning years, the years where I would have developed my career and everything, those in a ways, those got sucked out of me. But also there was really no internet back then, and my family and I had to go through it alone. We didn't have any resources. We didn't know of anybody. So we got far enough through it where, you know, my ex-wife threw me out. And luckily, I was able to find love in AA. And she went through the prison experience with me, and my kids certainly did, and my stepdaughter. And when it came out, we said, look, I don't want anyone to have to go through what we went through. You know, there's no reason for it. And, you know, I was kind of blessed that back then there wasn't really forfeiture. They didn't take away all my money. I had enough just to survive. You know, there were no frills. But I wanted to help people. And after a couple of years of volunteering, I decided to go to a seminary, and I applied to Union Theological Seminary, and they accepted me. So like for 3 years, I went to divinity school. And when I came out, I worked in the churches a little bit, even though I was Jewish. I don't know how that all works. Believe me, you know, I'm like a Jewish reverend. I don't even know. And do I have to know? I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't think so, right? So what happened is that I was living in Greenwich, and I was 10 years in, and so anybody who came through Greenwich AA who had a prison issue or criminal justice issue, everybody would say, go see Prison Jeff. He'll help you through. And so the math is kind of easy. I was doing that for 10 years, and maybe I helped 10 guys a year. So there were 100 guys who were like captains of industry and hedge funders and lawyers and doctors that I had helped through. But I was working in like the poorest community in the country as a minister. And so one day I get this phone call from, I'll give you his name, is Lawrence Delavine. And he was with, at the time, he was with Hedge Fund Magazine. He's now with Thomson Reuters. And he called me up and he said, are you the minister to hedge funders? And I said, no, not really. I said, I work with hedge funders like in Greenwich, in AA, and I minister in Bridgeport, but those concepts have never really come together. And so we arranged for an interview, and I like ran into the kitchen. I said to my wife, I think the big idea's come. I think this is the one, you know. I really didn't know how it was going to happen. But we started a ministry for people prosecuted for white-collar crimes and their families. And it almost immediately exploded because not only was I on the conference circuit and I was doing sermons like all up and down the East Coast, but the press thought it was just like this super cool thing. And it was, but it wasn't getting a lot of traction, you know, not in terms of being self-sustaining, but people were getting drawn to it because the more press there is, the more opportunity. Mm-hmm. And it was like every time, it was like ripping open a wound every single time. You know, it was like I had to be really vulnerable and really put my story out there in kind of this gut-wrenching way, because if I did, then it encouraged people to do the same. And so I would be like on the stage, for example, at the Nantucket Project. This is like a decade ago already. Even though the Nantucket Project is this coming weekend, for anyone who's going to the Nantucket Project, it's coming this weekend. I think we're taping on the 23rd of September. And but I will not be up there this weekend. But I was in front of like 600 people who could afford $5,000 or $6,000 a ticket. And I was telling this story that I had never told outside of an AA room. And so here's an experience where my wife and I were there, and I was talking about a suicide attempt and drug abuse and being an early victim of the opioid crisis. Even though I don't consider myself a victim, I was clearly into the into OxyContin. And going through all of this, it was years before I was going to get my law license back, and starting this ministry for people prosecuted for white-collar crimes and their families. And I was like, anything I thought I could prepare for, but Ian, I could not prepare for. It was like I was struck by lightning on that stage. You know, I was not like the cool, funny storyteller. I was just brought to my knees on that stage. It was so raw. And when I got off the stage, I didn't know if I connected with anybody. You couldn't hear a pin drop. There was no feedback from the audience whatsoever. And so I got off the stage. I didn't even know I got a standing ovation. I didn't even know. I was so frightened. And so for the next 3 days, we walked around the conference. And of the 600 or so people who were in the audience, I kid you not, 100 people came up to us over the weekend and gave us hugs and gave us their AA sobriety dates, or told us about their kids that were in rehab, and talked about their drug experiences and their mental health issues and things like that. And we went back to our room at night, And it became clear as my wife and I were talking, like, this is what people need to talk about. But there was no real outlet for them to do it. I mean, where do you talk about, like, getting prosecuted for white-collar crimes at the time? And where do you talk about, like, the pain that your families are going through because your kids are having drug crises and in rehab? And so we just saw it as our mission to open up that conversation, and that was the thing that just kind of happened. So just to finish off that little story, so there we are in Nantucket with all these rich and famous people, and I am on the balls of my ass. I couldn't, if they didn't pay for it, I couldn't even afford, like, the ferry ride up to Nantucket. But they paid for it because I was a speaker. So we get invited to this speaker's dinner up there in a tent in the backyard of the guy who's, like, the chairman of the board, maybe the CEO of one of the biggest banks in the world. I'm not going to say the bank because then you would know the guy. But there were chandeliers in the tent. And I, as well as I'd ever done in my life, I'd never been in this kind of experience before. It's like, like there's levels and then there's bigger levels. And we're in this tent and we're being treated like a celebrity in a way, because I was a speaker. And that when you go to one of these things and you're a speaker, it's like you get treated, like everybody knows who you are. I guess that's the story, because I've been in front on the stage. And I sit down at a table and they separate me and my wife. That's kind of what they do in these places. I didn't even know, right? So so she's at one table, I'm at another table, and I'm sitting down. And so the host, meaning the CEO of that bank, his wife is sitting next to me deliberately. I mean, you can see it. And the people at this table I'd seen on TV and I'd read about, and I'm, like, sitting with these people, and I'm just like a guy who'd been to prison. You know what I mean? It's like, and she's sitting right next to me. And I am telling you that you can tell, like, she's not even wearing jewelry because she's, like, transcended the need to wear jewelry. You know what I mean? She's, like, ultra wealthy. And there was no pretense about her whatsoever. She was, like, stunning. I mean, not just beautiful, but just in the way she carried herself. And I'm thinking, what am I doing sitting next to her? I mean, why am I there? I mean, she's the hostess, right? So this is why. So we do all the pleasantries, and we're having a nice night at the table and everything. And maybe 3/4 of the way through dinner, she just reaches over and she puts her hand on mine, like this. And she says, "Can I talk to you?" And we kind of just lean out of the table together. And so we, like, turn our chairs a little bit, and she talks, and so she could talk to me. And she said, our teenage son's in a rehab for heroin overdose. Can you help him? And I started to cry. I'm going to cry right now. I said, oh my God. I said, like, this is what we've done this for. We touched this family. Can you imagine? And in, like, the most unlikely way. And that's when I knew we had to just lean into this, and this is what we've been delivered to do.
That's awesome.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and I bet you it was even more of a hurdle getting there because of how you grew up. It wasn't necessarily socially acceptable to talk about these things.
No, of course not.
It's becoming more so in, like, my era, but not so much in yours.
No, I do feel really grateful, and I do understand that in a way I was a trailblazer. You know, I'm an OG already in this, but everybody's got to climb their own mountain. You know, you got to get through your own hurdles. I am grateful that hopefully I stand a little bit as a poster boy, a little bit as a beacon that it can be done, but you don't have to do it the way I did it. You got to find your own authenticity. You got to find it yourself. But, honestly, if I could do it, anybody can do it. It's just like, do the work, do the service, show up. And if you show up long enough, good things can happen.
We have to send you to go talk to Governor Rowland from Connecticut.
I know him.
Really?
Oh, yeah,
well,
sure.
You should call him up after this because he bailed on the show.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah, he was going to do it, and I sent him the questions and everything. And then he said he didn't want the news to, like the local news, to spin it in a negative way. But him sharing his story could help a ton of people.
I can kind of understand that because he's definitely had been greeted with a lot of cynicism here in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. We have a Tuesday night speaker series in our white collar group, and Jim McGreevey did the same thing with us. And he had the former governor of New Jersey, and he was pleasant about it. But I'm sure that there was something similar going on because it's hard to put your story out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But I think the more like higher notable people do it, like not the ones that, not like the millennials or my age group that share their story, but like the older generation, like the yous of the world, I think it goes a long way to changing the narrative about prison. I
think so. I mean, people do not understand prison at all. I didn't understand it before I went, and even in the lead up, it was certainly Orange is the New Black.
Yeah, that wasn't around. Yeah.
I didn't know. I was really from just Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, Prison Break didn't even come out yet.
I don't think so.
So let's talk about the lead up of you going to prison. Mm-hmm. If you were successful in your law firm and you had these wealthy clients, why'd you go off that path? What happened?
Oh, it was definitely the drugs. No question, it was the drugs. I had never really stopped partying from high school, much less. I had to get through law school, and I had to be a lawyer. But after I moved up to Westchester, and I had this one super big real estate client, I had a sports injury, and after that, I got addicted to painkillers, and so. For those 10 years, even as successful as I was doing, I was on painkillers. I was on Demerol and then ultimately OxyContin. And I had doctor friends who were just dispensing them at will. And that was kind of weird when I think about it now. But I'm sure I was manipulating them and into giving it to me. I'm not blaming them. No, there's no doctor shaming here, no victim, I had a Jones and I would do anything. And I needed refills once a week, every couple of weeks. And I wasn't even paying for them. Maybe it was like a $5 copay on my insurance or something. And nobody ever asked a question. Nobody ever stopped me. I hid it well. I mean, here's an example. You hear stories about like people who clean out bottles of booze, and they find like 50 bottles of booze, and they put them in paper bags, and they find a dumpster to go dump them in. I guess I was paranoid enough, and I thought my ex-wife would find out. So I went through my closets trying to find the bottles, the vials of the pills, and I did. I had like a bag, a paper bag, like from Whole Foods or something. I don't really remember, and I found 70 of them, just empty, and you would have thought that would have been enough information to tell me, okay, maybe there's a problem. And I probably did know there was a problem, but what would happen every every week is like I would, like maybe a Thursday night, I would start to take a lot. And then by Sunday night, I had to kind of like taper off so that I could get through work, even though I was at that point vomiting up blood. I was really into it, like in this sick kind of way. And I swore I would never do it anymore. But I would get like dope sick by, Thursday maybe. So I went through withdrawal almost every week. And like there was no way I could stop on my own.
How were you able to function as an attorney while battling this addiction during that time period?
Well, for the first few years, first of all, it's ramping up. But for the first few years, I was actually doing better because it was like it was a disinhibitor. I was taking risks that I probably wouldn't have otherwise taken. And they weren't really reckless risks. They were, at first, they were kind of like appropriate business risks. I went into real estate. I was in health clubs. I owned a restaurant. I was on the school board at my kid's school. I mean, I was on the school board of the school, and for 6 years, and the meetings were at night, and they were on local cable access TV, and I would wear sunglasses. And I was like the school board member who wore sunglasses because my eyes were all red. There was like no way I could be on camera. And it became like a local joke. I was the school board member with sunglasses. I wear my sunglasses at night. And like, I owned a restaurant on the corner. So it was like, everyone would come back and we would hang out at the bar. And it was just not cool.
Did your wife and kids know?
Nope.
No one took your family? No one?
I don't know. I was just like the fun dad, and I was a very, very loving father, but I don't think that I was a good role model in the sense that I was teaching my kids, life skills, character, life skills, and the kind of things that they would need. I was very overindulgent and enabling, and my kids had everything they wanted. We went on like 5 big vacations a year, and I was spending recklessly, as my drug use was ramping up, and that's not something I'm proud of. It just was the truth, and then I got past the tipping point, and then it got really ugly. It got really ugly. I was becoming really reckless, and it was the lead up to the .com bubble and then burst, and I was way over invested with clients in .com, and I thought because I was like a major shareholder because I was in the founders. I was representing founders, and I was in startup, and I remember I was like sitting at my computer at my desk, and I had this big desk in this big office, and it was kind of rock and roll. I had stacks of amplifiers and my guitars in there in my office, and I would invite like clients to come play guitar, and it was ridiculous, but just like the way it was. And I had these Post-its all around my computer screen, old CRTs, no flat screens back then, right? And I had these Post-its, and I would say to my assistant, I would say, if any of these hit, I'm set for life. And she said to me, what if none of them hit? I said, oh, how can that happen? There's like 12 of them, and one of them has to hit. And then the bubble burst in I think March of 2020, and
or 2000 or
2000.
Yeah,
2000. That's what I meant. 2000. Sorry. And none of them hit. They all died. And then I was left with not having brought in enough cash because I had doubled down on all of these investments on trading legal services for pieces of these companies. And I was way into my addiction at that point, and there was no way out. So I didn't have enough cash to make payroll, and incredibly, because the business was doing really well, but we were cash poor. And I told my assistant, I said, just move some money out of the client escrow account, move it into the operating. And she thought I was nuts, and I was nuts. And the minute that happened, it was a suicide run.
And she agreed to do that for you?
She pushed back, but it was just like two buttons on a computer terminal. It wasn't like, it was just like move from this one to this one, and she did it.
Did you have partners, or it was just you?
It was just me. Well, I had named junior partners, but they weren't equity partners.
So if you had equity partners, do you think you would have been able to get away with it at first?
No. I think that I had no accountability to anything or anybody, and that was a mistake, especially given my addictive personality and everything. It was a mistake.
Do you ever think about if you didn't have that sports accident and you didn't get prescribed those pills, you would still be running that business today?
I don't know, because I don't know. It's like the chicken and the egg thing, I don't really know. I really do think it was my fate to kind of get off that hamster wheel, no matter what. It wasn't gonna end well, no matter what. The precipitating event was that sports injury, but I had never really gotten out of that life sufficiently, and so I think it. Here's really the thing. You're really forcing me to be introspective here.
I'm doing my job, right?
Yeah, you're doing your job. I think that I found out that I had bipolar disorder. That's the thing, and that I really been self-medicating. And the thing that I was best at in life was also the thing that wasn't best for me. That kind of intensity and the all in, all or nothing, kill or be killed kind of life, that was not good for my pathology, and there would have been a moment that it had to stop. And ultimately what happened is that I threw a grenade into my life. I resigned my law license after all that ugliness, and I did it before I got disbarred, and then I took an overdose of the pills, and then thankfully survived it, but I needed chapter 1 of my life to end.
Did you decide to do that after an investigation into you started, or?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So tell us about how the investigation starts and what exactly happened.
So I was using the escrow account kind of as a wallet. I would make payroll with it, and then I would put the money back, and it happened a bunch of times. I don't know, maybe a dozen times or so, but that's enough to get you disbarred. I mean, you can't do that. But there was no money missing. It was just that, once I did it once, it was just easy to keep doing it.
Like you had good cash flow to be able to replace it.
Oh yeah, it was like factoring receivables. Even though that, because of my addiction, the business was drying up. And then what happened was 9/11 happened, and I took it very, very hard. And maybe because I knew I was kind of like dancing, with the devil already. And about a month or two after 9/11, they were offering these SBA loans for businesses that had been adversely affected by 9/11. And they were advertising them on the radio and on TV, And I knew my business had been affected, but I really didn't know if it had been affected by 9/11 or by my drug use. I really didn't know. But some combination my business was probably halved at that point, and I had been investigated at that point for a couple of years because of the escrow irregularities. And we were doing kind of well. I had hired an ethics attorney, and I thought maybe I could skate through, and that was probably delusional. But I borrowed $247,000 from the SBA, and when it became clear that I was going to lose my law license because of the escrow irregularities, and that was mostly because, without assigning blame to anyone, a business partner of mine who I was in the health club business and in the real estate business with, he wrote a lengthy letter to them basically exposing everything that I had done.
Oh, so if he didn't do that, they wouldn't have found out about the escrow?
No. I mean, they knew about that, but this was the thing that threw it over. And I don't blame him. I don't know ill will. I'm sure I was treating him very, very badly. At that point, I was out of my mind. I was treating I think I screwed this up.
It's okay.
So I think I was treating everybody pretty badly at that point.
So how did they even, what are like the checks and balances for the escrows? And can you explain what the actual escrow is and what money goes in there?
Well, it's client money for closings. And, there was probably a couple of $1 million sitting there just waiting for people who, financings or closings or whatever the money was coming in and out. It wasn't my money, but we were holding it for clients. I mean, so here's a practice tips, folks. If you're going to use a lawyer and there's going to be an escrow, it's healthy for there to be at least 2 lawyers in that law firm who are going to check one another. I think there's a high incidence of people who get brought down who aren't accountable to somebody.
So who's actually looking at that escrow to report it?
Nobody.
So how does it get reported then?
So what happened was, in my case, there was this little tiny situation that developed. And I'm telling you, it was like somebody who got a check maybe for like $2,500, but became impatient and didn't get the check fast enough. And called up the character committee or the grievance committee, and called them up and said, "Look, I haven't got my money, and I'm pissed off." And so I got a call from them and said, what's with the $2,500? I said, I don't know. It was just an anomaly. Sometimes things happen. We'll take care of it today. We took care of it within an hour. But the way it works is if there is a complaint against you, no matter what the complaint is, they want to see 6 months worth of escrow records. And there was no way I could give them 6 months worth of escrow records without it being completely clear that I was using it as a checkbook. And with that, I hired an ethics lawyer, and I was either going to survive it or not. And I was like, and I was not even thinking clearly at that point because of the Demerol and the OxyContin. But there's no way to survive. The chances of surviving that were very, very small. But then I'm in this time period, what do you do? I mean, do I take in new clients? What's my obligation to tell them? Am I in business? Am I not in business? And I'm not alone in that. It's like no man's land. You don't know what to do. But and my acuity had been going downhill. I mean, it got to the point where I wasn't even showing up to work. I was like staying home or going to a friend's house and watching the Golf Channel instead of showing up to work. So things were getting worse. And then the 9/11 thing happened. And at some point it became clear that there was no way I wasn't going to survive this. So I went to another lawyer who I respected in Westchester, who had a very good practice. And I said, look, I need to retire. I need to offload my practice. So will you take on my clients? We take on my staff, take over everything. And there's no payment for it. I just need to get out. He may have suspected what was going on, but there was no reason. I mean, he was getting a windfall. He was getting a very active law practice for free, but he had to take over everything, and he did. After a few months of negotiations or whatever, I don't really recall quite how that went, and so for the last 3 or 4 months. It was just me and an assistant sitting in my offices, kind of waiting for the axe to drop. Yeah, it was ugly.
So who is the first law enforcement official that approaches you?
So what happened is that once I resigned my law license, that same night is when I got my last prescription of opioids, and I overdosed that night. And wound up on the floor, and then went through detox, and then I went to rehab for 7 weeks. And I came out, and I no longer had a career. Everybody, I was like persona non grata everywhere, in my community, in the law practice. I knew I was going to lose my house. My family was in tatters, but I went from rehab right into AA, and I was getting sober, and I found like a home. I found like a way to do that, and I just became like a card-carrying member of AA for about 20 months, and while we sold the house, and we moved into an apartment in Greenwich, and we were trying to just figure out how to survive. And I was about 20 months in, and I got a phone call from a special agent who said there's a warrant out for my arrest in connection with the SBA loan that I had taken, and I had misrepresented myself on the SBA loan application. And actually what I said was that I had an office near Ground Zero, which I didn't have. And I didn't even need to do on the application, because my office in Westchester was in the bubble of counties right around New York where I would have gotten the loan anyway. But I needed to make sure I got that loan.
Were they giving extra loans because of 9/11?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so
just like now, just like
COVID and everything.
The same exact thing. For all these PPP and EIDL loans and everything else, when people are getting prosecuted, I went through it 20 years ago.
So why do you think you made that lie if you didn't need to?
Because I was out of my mind. I was desperate. I was out of my mind. There was a little shard of truth in it, because I did have conference space in that building. It's Donald Trump's building, by the way, at 40 Wall Street. And I did have conference space in there. So it wasn't like a complete lie, but it was a lie. And I had no economic loss whatsoever because I couldn't use that conference space. None.
How do you think they found you, though? They would have had to dig, because on paper it would have looked normal. Someone must have reported you.
Well, two reasons. One, the guy who had written that letter about me, he clued them in. But I mean, I'll never know exactly the reason why. But also what happened is that they had a mortgage on my house. So when I, to backstop the loan. So when I sold my house, there was insufficient funds to pay off the loan. And as soon as that happens, they start an investigation.
Wow.
And so it took, almost 2 more years to even hear. And when I say denial, I didn't even know that I had done anything wrong.
Now, they didn't call to question you. They just immediately said, we have a warrant for your arrest.
Yeah, because they do the feds do their investigation before they contact you. In the state, it's a little different. I mean, in the state they'll arrest you or they'll indict you, and before they've completed their investigation. They just don't have the funding. But in the feds, they have the case airtight before they even arrest you.
But I would have thought they would at least want to question you, get you on like a lying to federal officers or something, and then, go through it.
Nope.
How was your kids and wife dealing with the situation before you got arrested of just losing everything? Because you went from living a certain lifestyle to now it's completely different.
The rug got pulled out completely from under them. They were freaking out, and in ways I did not understand. I was getting sober, and I knew, or I had been told, and I knew that I had to put the oxygen mask back on myself before I tried to, before I tried to save anyone else. And I didn't know how much it had affected my kids. I didn't know how much it had affected my ex-wife. I really didn't know. And once I did get arrested, it was like just a countdown of weeks, maybe a month, I don't know how long, before my ex-wife threw me out. And so any money or access to money I had until I wound up, I did get, arrested at that point, and I had to turn myself in and to the marshals and get it arraigned and all of that. And then it took another 2 years to get sentenced and go to prison. But every penny I had went to putting a roof over their heads. And so I literally went into my AA meeting in Greenwich in the morning and raised my hand and said, when it was my time to share, and said, I got thrown out this morning. The only thing I have in the world now is 2 duffel bags of clothes in the back of my car. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't even know where I'm going to sleep tonight. And the men in AA said, you can stay with us, either on our sofas or in our guest rooms. And for a year and a half, that's what I did. I lived really without a home until I went off to prison. But I had met this woman in AA. And I was rebounding from my relationship, and she was rebounding from her relationship. And her name is Lynn Springer, and I'm married to her now, so I can use her name. And we got sober together, and we just found one another, and so I can tell you that Lynn did not marry me for my money. And I was not a good bet. There must have been, I know what I saw in her. She was kind and beautiful and just, a good soul and going through a lot. But what she saw in me, you'd have to ask her, I was out of my mind. But I think that my essence there, of wanting to be a helper in a helping profession, and we connected, and then after I went to prison, she came to visit, my kids came to visit, and things came together, but so from the minute I resigned my law license to the spring of 2006, when I reported to prison, that was 4 years.
Yeah, it's a very long process going through that. How much time did the judge end up giving you?
18 months.
Do you think that because by that point you had been in recovery, you met someone new, you were trying to rebuild your life, do you think you needed prison to shape into the person you are now?
I think the short answer is yes. I still needed to wipe the smirk off my face a little bit, but I had been in AA almost 4 years at that point. So I was very invested in in spirituality and the steps and in doing the next right thing. And, just probably from a lot of people who've sat in the seat before me that, if you're drinking or doing drugs, you're pretty much doing it right up to the prison door. People detox in prison. But, I was a sober man when I went into prison. And so when I went into prison, for example, there's AA in prison and there's NA in prison. And when I went to my first AA meeting, which was about a week after I got to prison, now this is on a compound. I went to a low. I didn't go to a camp. So I'm on a compound of 1,500 guys, and it's basically 1,500 drug dealers, right? There's a couple of white-collar guys, a couple of stockbrokers, a couple of doctors. I think I was the only ex-lawyer there at the time. But everyone else is basically a drug dealer. So there's 30 guys there in this AA meeting out of 1,500 people who could use an AA meeting. And not one of those guys had been sober on the street. They had all gotten sober in prison. So they were using in prison. You can get anything in prison. And so when I got there, it was a little confusing to me. And they taught me how to be sober in prison. And at that time, I was the only one there who had spent any sober time on the street. And they were all completely nervous about what was going to happen when they got released. Are they going to be able to stay sober? The temptations of women, the temptations of gambling, the temptations of life, life on the street. And I was able to tell them how I was able to stay sober on the street. And then, in the 13 months I was there were other people who came in who had been sober on the street. But at the moment, that first moment, and it was a very profound experience.
What prison did they send you to, and why did they send you to a low and not a camp?
Well, as you probably know, when they designate you, they try to designate you to a facility within 500 miles of your house. And for me, it was just luck of the draw. On the day I got designated, there were no beds available in the camps. And so I got I got to remember what it's called, an administrative...
a hold type thing.
Yeah, there's a term for it. I can't remember. I'll think of it maybe. And not a variance. There's a word for it. And so they just bumped me up a security level, and I went to Allenwood Low. And when I got the designation to Allenwood, Allenwood is where Camp Fed, Club Fed was. There was a golf course, there were tennis courts, but they had closed the camp a year prior. And I didn't know, so I went to the website and I saw it and I said, wait a second, there's no camp here. And it said Allenwood Low, but I didn't know what that meant. And it turned out that, I had to go to a low, with controlled movements and bars on the windows, and it was a low, but there were gangs, and there was, like I said, most of the people there were either drug dealers, or they were, or they had been stepped down from higher facilities. And I was scared to death, but it wound up being one of the most meaningful and profound and fascinating experiences of my life, and something that changed me profoundly. And I turns out I needed. But, I wouldn't go so far as some people say, oh, it was the greatest thing. You hear this stuff, or you hear this, right?
I say it. I thought it was good for me.
No, but you hear people say, oh, it was like the greatest experience. It was something I really needed.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have learned those experience. I love those lessons in a less harsh environment. But those were the cards I was dealt.
Now, did people give you a hard time for maybe looking or being a sex offender? Did people think you were that?
No.
Because when I went to the low, that was my experience. So I was curious as like a middle-aged man if anyone ever accused you of that.
What really happened was that I had confided, because I went on Friday nights. I went to Jewish services, and I also went to Christian services on as well. I went to every service you could possibly go to. I went to Brotherhood of Islam. I went to Islam. I went to all kinds of things. I was fascinated by it all. But I confided in some of the guys at services on Friday night that I'd been a lawyer. And I wasn't a kid. I mean, I had a lot of legal experience. So once I didn't realize that the prison has ears everywhere. That there's no secrets in prison. Everyone finds out everything, and pretty fast people found out that I had been a lawyer. And once that happened, there was like nobody thought that I was a sex offender or anything like that. I mean, people knew, all right, this guy's in for something law related.
I'm sure the inmates loved you. Because you have your jailhouse lawyers, and then you have anyone that was an actual real attorney.
I was the only one there who had been an actual real attorney at the time.
Were you turning it into a hustle at all?
No.
Okay.
No. One, I didn't need to. I still had money, so I didn't need to. And I had been warned, even in R&D when I first got there. And I was there naked, and the guy doing the intake on me. So I'm standing there naked in my first, the first hour. I'm in R&D, and he looked at me and he said to me, he's looking at my chart, I guess, and he said to me, "So you're a lawyer?" And I'm telling you, as humbly as I possibly could be, I said to him, "No, but I used to be." I had no idea that was the right answer. You know what I mean? It was like, and he just looked at me and he said to me, "Look, people are going to ask you a lot of favors and a lot of questions. As long as you don't take money from any of them, you'll have no problem with us." And I got that. So I accepted no favors. I accepted nothing. I told people, well, really, here's what happened, basically. When you go to prison, you got to learn to shut your mouth. And you do a lot of listening, and you don't talk. So word was out that I was the lawyer, but I wasn't saying anything to anybody. And I learned to keep my mouth quiet. And at that point, I was walking like 10 miles a day around the track. I was trying to get into shape, and I was losing weight and everything. So I'm walking around the track, and I've learned enough at that point, like just to kind of, enough of the lay of the land, right? So I'm walking around the track, and as I come around one of the corners, there's a shot caller standing there. And I knew he was a shot caller. At least I don't know if I knew who all the shot callers were, but I knew this guy was a shot caller. And he's standing there, and he kind of like, gives me a sign, "Come over here." And I know at this point the thing to do is to not talk. Just give nonverbal communication. Do not speak. Okay, for folks, if you are heading to prison, I'm telling you, do not speak. Okay, things will go much better. So he just says to me, "So I hear you're the lawyer." And I just shook my head like this. And he said, "So I hear around you could be trusted." And the way I was trusted is because you don't speak, right? And I just said, like this. And then he just looked at me. He said, "All right then." And as soon as he said, "All right then," I had been passed over. I had been passed on by all the shot callers. The next day, I'm walking the track, and people are coming up to me to ask me legal questions. It was just like that. And it was nothing I did other than to behave in a trustworthy way, which means not being in the gossip, not being in the chatty thing. And people came up to me. And I was not a criminal lawyer at the time. I was a transactional lawyer. I was a real, I told you earlier, right? And so people were coming up to me with their bankruptcies and their divorce things and their dissolutions. And there were like hip hop record producers in there who and their partners were screwing them on the outside. And this was like exactly what I knew how to do. And they had lawyers on the outside, but they couldn't really communicate with their lawyers and things. And I'm thinking, I can really help these people. This is like what I know how to do. But I said, and I just said to everyone, listen, there's cameras everywhere, there's guards everywhere. The only place anybody could talk to me is on the track. You come up to me and we talk on the track, and I'll give you some advice about what to do. And I did. And for the next year or so, maybe 8-9 months or whatever it was, I just walked the track with people and just gave them pointers as to what to do. And what I learned from that experience is that these are people. Every single one of them, they had families and they were getting screwed, and they had screwed people, and it was just like on the outside. You know what I mean? It was real life, everyone going through the same thing. They were just behind bars and they couldn't protect themselves. And I could help them out a little with the things I really knew. I mean, if someone came to me with a 2255 or they wanted appeal, they wanted to know what to do in their criminal case, I just said to them, go talk to the jailhouse lawyers in the library. I don't know anything about that. But if it was business related or it was family related, I could help them. And that's kind of what inhabited part of me that really made me want to just turn to service and to helping people, because it was just so clear that there was a whole universe of people who really needed the help, but because of their life circumstances, they just weren't going to be able to be treated the same way anymore.
What was something you expected prison to be like, but it turns out it wasn't actually like that?
Well, I thought it was going to be like in a cell. I thought it was going to be me alone. And what I didn't realize, it was like the least alone place. I had been in isolation for years prior to that, looking over my shoulder, whether I was sober or not. I was like looking over my shoulder for years while I was doing not such nice things in law and everything. And once I got in there, people don't know, it's a community. It's a big, like, robust community. And you find your place in that community, or it finds you. And I had buddies in there. I had it was like a really beautiful experience in a lot of ways. I mean, it was harsh and it was ugly, and there was a lot of crazy stuff going on. There were lockdowns and there was some gang fights, and I saw a couple of people get killed, which I didn't expect. But those were like anomalies. I mean, for the most part, there's no alone time at all. There's like, I was in a barrack of 180 guys, and they're snorting and snoring and using a bathroom all at the same time. And, it was completely the opposite of what I thought it was going to be.
There's no peace and quiet.
No. In fact, the only place where there was peace and quiet for me was two places. One is that I took 200 music lessons in there. I took 200 guitar lessons in there. So in that music room, it was pretty peaceful. And also because I had really turned into religion while I was in there. I was doing some chapel duty. And so while I was doing that, in the chapel and all, I was actually able to, kind of commune one-on-one with my higher power, which I didn't really understand what my connection to God was going to be at that point. And certainly not until later, until I went to divinity school, that I really kind of like connect with all of that. But those were two pretty quiet places. But everything else, it's like a high school cafeteria, or maybe more like a middle school cafeteria. People, it was just, chaos.
Were you surprised by like the politics of like you can't sit at a certain spot, you have to use the bathroom a certain way? Was that interesting to you?
It was so interesting. All right, so here's what I tell people. Okay, it wasn't. I don't know how much of it was my personal experience, but this is what I tell people. I said, let's pretend, for example, that it's your third day there, and you're finally let out of your unit, and you wander over to R&D. You cross the compound. For those of you in a control movement situation, you basically have 10 minutes to get across the compound to go to where you need to go, and then they lock the doors. And if you're stuck in the middle of the compound, maybe you're going to go to the shoe, maybe you're not. But it's like I lost my train of thought. So I lost my train.
The politics aspect, what you were surprised about.
Oh yeah.
That, yeah.
Oh yeah. So I go to R&D. I go to rec, and if you're standing there at rec and you're like, there's like, it's like a junior high school athletic fields, there's track, there's baseball, there's basketball, there's people working out, there's a weight stack, and I wasn't really expecting any of that. So here's what I tell people. So now you wander over to the basketball court, and there's people playing basketball, and for me, I'm like 50 pounds out of shape at the time, so I'm not like running up and down a basketball court. But there's people playing basketball, and there's some bleachers over there, and the bleachers are like bleachers from like an elementary school or maybe a junior high school. It's like a three level bleachers. And so I'll say to someone, all right, so you see the little bleacher over there. Where do you sit? And they go, what do you mean? I go sit down. I said, no. If you're going to go sit in that bleacher, you sit in the last row. Even if there's nobody else in the bleachers and no one's sitting there, you don't sit in the front row. And they go, why not? I said, because that's somebody's seat. Somebody had earned that seat. That's not your seat. Your seat's in the last row. You don't go to the front row unless somebody invites you to the front row. If someone says, hey, why don't you come down and sit in the front row, who's been there for a while, then you can sit in the front row. In the TV room, you sit in the back until someone says to you, hey, why don't you come up and move up? You don't touch that TV. You don't change the channel. I said, if you go into the TV room and it's the middle of the day, you don't even have, middle of the day, there's no one there. It's 400 seats. Empty, just you, and 7 TVs up on there on the wall. You don't change the channel without looking at the entire room of vacant chairs and turn around and say to the empty room, does anyone mind if I change the channel? Because you don't know, there could be one guy sleeping somewhere in the back on 3 chairs. And if you change that channel and he happens to be listening to that, that could be a dangerous place for you to be. So it's like the stuff you learn in kindergarten, but you don't really know how to apply it. But I learned how to apply that, and I'm telling you now, I'm out of prison 17 and a half years, and I still apply the same thing. I learned how to be a respectful adult in prison.
It's pretty interesting, isn't it?
It's amazing. It's amazing, right? It's like I'm telling you, it's like if someone cuts the line now, I could be standing in a McDonald's, and if someone cuts the line, we're all good. You know what I mean? We're all good. It's not my place to say anything. We're all good. Everything's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I try to avoid confrontation over silly things because some people flip out about that in the free world, you know? I just stay away from that.
I used to think I was important. Are you kidding? Don't you know who I am? But now, and there's no question that my sphere of influence now, as in doing what I'm doing, the work I'm doing and everything, there's no question that my sphere of influence is 100 times larger than when I was practicing law. I mean, the money's not, but my sphere of influence is. And it comes from a place of service and humility, I think. I mean, that's certainly how I got my law license back.
Once you got out, were there a bunch of family members, friends asking you about prison and curious about it? And were you kind of reserved off from talking about it?
Mostly nobody from my old life whatsoever wanted to talk to me. So I didn't have that much of that. Even my family, even my extended family. I didn't really know why I was cast. I mean, I knew why I was cast off on an ice barge, but it was continually surprising to me the people who I was close with and who wanted nothing to do with me. But in the AA world, you know, that's a whole, you know, that's a world of broken people who've hit their bottoms. And so I was able to talk about all of this and share the stories. So I didn't really have quite that experience for the most part. But like in AA where they say, you know, stay away from people, places, and things, that was easy because none of the people, places, and things wanted anything to do with me. So I never really had to worry about any of those old influences affecting my sobriety or affecting my growth.
How hard was it to transition and start rebuilding your life? I know we hear later on that you found that you were telling us earlier that how you got into your current role, but what was that the immediate aftermath of prison like for you?
Well, mostly I threw myself back, you know, almost immediately back into AA and back into the program. But I also had court-mandated drug and alcohol counseling. And I was with this counselor, and he said, "All right, so what's your life plan? What are you thinking about doing?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm in AA. I'm gonna, get sober. I'm gonna, have sponsees. I'm gonna do my thing." And he said to me, "Maybe you should do some things that you can actually put on a resume." And I'm thinking, a resume? I never had a resume in my life, right? And he said, "Yeah, like on a resume, you can't put have sponsees. You actually have to do things." And I said, "Like what?" He said, "Well, you're going to have to get a job and you're going to have to volunteer." And I said, I didn't know what he was talking about, but I called up the rehab. I went to Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan. That was my rehab. And I called them up and I said, are you accepting volunteers? And they said, "Sure, come on over." And I did an interview and I told them the truth about everything. And they said, "All right, we'll have to run a background check on you." And I'm thinking, I just told you everything. There's nothing I left out. And I left there and I'm thinking, oh my God, what? If I can't get a volunteer job, if I can't work for free at a rehab, I'm screwed. I mean, this is my rehab. 2 hours later, they called me up and they said, come in tomorrow, you can volunteer. And that's where it really started. Because when they asked me, what do you want to do as a volunteer? I said, I'll collate. I'll staple anything. There's nothing too low I won't do. And I would say after 2 or 3 weeks there, what they realized was that they had an ex-lawyer who they could actually give projects to and I would be willing to do them for free. I needed to get my life back, and there's no question through volunteering the cream rises to the top real fast. And I don't mean in terms of character, but I mean in terms of people who are actually willing to put the work in. And I volunteered there like 2-3 days a week, maybe 4 days a week, and I was doing like seriously sophisticated projects for them that they needed done. And from there, I just said, this is fantastic. And from there, I went to a drug and alcohol diversion facility, a residential program where they sent people from the inner city who, if they got through that program, maybe the judge wouldn't sentence them to prison. And so I was with kind of like hardcore addicts and things in there, and I was doing running groups and doing bed checks and urine checks, and they were locked down sometimes, and they would bring the dogs in, the whole thing. But I was like not one of them. I was like a counselor. And so it was like on the other side of it. I was with them with the dogs. And I said, this is what I want to do. And I didn't really understand. I didn't know what my trajectory was going to be. But I was going to church with my girlfriend who was going to become my wife. And one of the pastors said to me, I think you should go to seminary. And I didn't even know what that was. And I was Jewish. And I didn't know what it was. But he said, you go to a progressive seminary, and it's basically a place where you learn about social justice and faith and about connection and God. And I was all in.
And you're paid to go through that? Like, how are you supporting yourself?
Well, again, I had some money.
Okay, you still had money tucked aside from before?
I still had some money, right. So it was like just enough to survive. And I was getting paid like a stipend, a little bit of money from these places that I was working. And then I had to borrow money, for like student loans to get through seminary. I went there full time for 3 years.
How hard was it to get your law license back?
I don't know the answer to that really, because I just had to kind of do what had to get done. There was an application that had to get filled out. I hired a lawyer to help me, and the application process and getting through all the actual application took about a year, because there's this voluminous list of things. And I had been, at that point, I think when I started, I had been out of law for like 15 years. So it's like 15 years of tax returns and 15 years of every single employer and 15 years of explanation. And, the stack of things that I gave them was probably 8 inches thick. And I had to write a narrative about what I had done and what I had gone through. And that narrative I wrote was 14,000 words long. So it was, I said, I'm going to tell the truth, every single thing. And also, at that point, we had been doing the ministry for a while. So there were a lot of articles, and there were a lot of interviews and podcasts and things I had been on at that point, and social media. And they could have looked at any of it. And I didn't want them to find any holes in the story, any difference between like what I had said to her. If I had done an interview with Ian Bick, but not told the same exact story on my application, I didn't want them to say, like at my hearing, well, you said to Ian Bick this, but on your application you wrote that. So I had to go back and listen and read every single one of them and find where the story wasn't exactly the same. Because, the stories change over time a little bit. That took a year, and I submitted my application, and I had to do my continuing legal ed, and I had to take the ethics exam and all of that. And then I was in the process, and COVID hit, and that slowed things down a little, and I had to do my hearing over Zoom. And the hearing went really, really well. I mean, there were And I think it was because I had devoted all of those years to ministry and service in AA, and I could have applied for my law license reinstatement after 7 years, but I waited almost 10 more years after that. And they asked me, and right in the hearing, they said to me, why'd you wait so long to put in a reinstatement application? And I said to them, because I didn't know if I wanted to be a lawyer again. I was doing interesting, good work. You know, I mean, it wasn't like I was biding my time to put my law license application back in. This is kind of the logical extension of how I could help people. And those lawyers on the committee thought like being a lawyer is like, isn't it being a lawyer like what everyone wants to do? Isn't that like what you, and I said, no, not really. I said, it almost killed me the first time. But what I found out here is that the people I was working with, the people who have been prosecuted for white-collar crimes, they not only needed like a spiritual and emotional help, they really needed a lawyer to trust. Because, you know, they're cut adrift. You know, they're like a victim of the system. And imagine having a lawyer who'd been through the system, who you could really communicate with, who understood. And I said, that wasn't so obvious to me that that's where I wanted to go. But once it became clear to me, that's when I put my law license back. And it was like, it was like a eureka moment, but I had never verbalized that before. Even I didn't understand that so much. And I think all those years of putting in all of that service, I wasn't doing it so that it would enhance my law application. I was just kind of doing God's work. And I'm pretty sure that's the reason why that committee approved my application. And then we did find out that they had approved me, and then they sent it over to the court as a recommendation. And then I had to wait 6 more months to find out if the court was gonna grant my motion or not. And
which court? Just a federal court?
No. This was the Second Department Appellate Division of the Supreme Court in New York.
So they have to approve it too.
Oh yeah, no, they're the ones who do get to approve it. Oh. You know, because I had to make a motion for reinstatement, and I can tell you for those 6 months, I was shitting bricks. It was like every single day. I was on my phone, and I would at 4:00 every day I would pull up the docket to see if my name was on it, and you know, and so I'm sitting there like on my phone, and it's like, you know, and the writing's really small, you know, like it was like people versus such and such, people versus such and such, and I'm looking for my name, and every day my name is not coming up, and I go, and I would call my lawyer every few weeks, and he said, yeah, they're going to get to it when they get to it. So I am literally sitting there like in a chair in my living room, and 4:00 comes, and I open up the thing, and I'm looking at it, and I see what I think is my name, and like the chill, like going up and down me. And so, you know, like on an iPhone, you know, it's like I spread it open, and there's my name, and it's a link, and my wife's in the kitchen, and I don't know what to do, right? And I knew what to do, but I'm like, you know, I didn't know if I should get her. And I push the link, and it pops up, and basically there's a little gobbledygook, and it was one sentence, and what the sentence says is that the applicant has been restored to the role of lawyers. Wow. And that which meant was that I was already a lawyer again. I had been restored that morning, and I can't even describe. And so I hit AirPrint, you know, and to print it out, and I printed it out, and I ran into the kitchen, and just put it down in front of my wife. And she read it, and the two of us started just crying. And then she started dancing. And she happened to be on the FaceTime with my stepdaughter, with her daughter, who kind of saw this unfolding, and she hit record. And so we have a video of us crying and my wife dancing around the kitchen. And that was like the moment of like, I didn't have to worry about plan B anymore in my life. Like, this is what I was going to do. And this is how I was going to be able to help people going forward.
What was plan B?
Luckily, I don't have to go so deep into plan B, but the ministry was going well. You know, we were helping a lot of people, and had hundreds of people, and we had a white collar support group that we were running every Monday night on Zoom. And that was going to be fully plan B. I had no idea if it was going to become self-sustaining or be able to even pay me a salary. I had no idea. But then what happened was about 2 months after I got reinstated, let me just take some water. Mm-hmm. About 2 months after I got reinstated, that's when I heard from the writer at the New Yorker, who said, we want to write an article about you and the white collar support group. And then we just knew, like, if we have 2 or 3 months now to put everything in place we needed, because we didn't know what the effect of the New Yorker article was going to be, but it was at least likely that we were going to double or triple the volume of people we were going to take in every day. And we didn't want there to be a bottleneck there. We needed to lean on some technology and lean on ways to manage all of that. And as it turned out, that all turned out to be true. And it also happened simultaneously with the law firm. But it also kind of like gave rise to all kinds of other opportunities, because once the New Yorker came out, then we heard from Hollywood documentary producers and literary agents, and you know, people came out of the woodwork. All of a sudden, I was not a leper anymore. You know, and articles had already come out a little bit about the white collar lawyer who had gone to prison and had become a minister, and there was this whole story, and it was all kind of like bubbling to the surface, and people were interested in it, and luckily, after everything I'd been through, like there was like no ego involved in it. You know what I mean? It was like, because you know, it's like, it doesn't make, it's like you can't ride the roller coaster. It's like there could be like a really cool article and you think, oh, this is going to change my life. Mm-hmm. And then nothing, right? Nothing. Like, what do you mean? Like that was going to be the big one. And the New Yorker did turn out to be the big one, but like not in any way I expected. You know, it wasn't like all of a sudden like huge opportunities were being dropped down from heaven, but it was a slow burn. I mean, a lot of people wind up knowing about us, like the story I told you about when I went to the conference. And over time, now it's been, you know, it's been a couple of years, you know, maybe 3 years since then. It added like just so much legitimacy to what we're doing, and I'm older now. You know, it's like I don't, you know, I'm not looking to build a big business or a big practice. I'm not trying to get rich. I'm just trying to live a nice, solid life, do some service, and you know, and spend time with my wife.
Did you owe restitution? And if so, did you pay it?
I had paid restitution. I had the money. You know, it was a weird deal. You know, it was like, I'd been a lawyer, and I had some money in the bank. So within the like the organization of after I got arrested, one of the deals was, all right, so we'll write a check and we'll make the restitution payment, and that would get factored into my sentencing.
Mm-hmm. Now, all these years later, has your felony affected your day-to-day life at all?
Every day, in a lot of different ways. I mean, approaching it like just from an emotional standpoint. For the first few years, it was like the helicopter scene in Goodfellas. I thought everybody was chasing me. I mean, literally, I walked out of my apartment in Greenwich one day, and there were 3 helicopters circling overhead, and I got like super, super paranoid. They're here for me. It didn't even dawn on me that since we only lived a couple of blocks from 95, that there was a tractor-trailer accident on 95 and the helicopters were interested in the accident and not on me. I mean, that's how paranoid for a while. And even still, it's like, things have gone very nicely, but there are mornings I can't get out of bed. Like, I've been institutionalized in some ways, and just even the way I communicate with people and the way I connect with people. But there's no question that there's a felony penalty for a lot of things. Now, getting my law license back kind of revalidated me in a lot of ways. I don't really have that overtly, but are there some people who are not going to do business with me or not be willing to do, or a place. We lived in Greenwich for a long time, and we just moved down to West Palm Beach about 1.5 years ago, and there's a certain anonymity as to like living in a new area where they really don't know my story so much, or if they do, it's like after the fact, So they're like looking at me as a lawyer, they're looking at me as a guy who has a comeback story, but we were invited to some like holiday parties in Greenwich, and people wouldn't talk to me. And to this day, I am sure that it's not because of what I did or what my story is. It's because of their own insecurity about what they're doing or what they've done. I represented a mirror on the soft underbelly of what is really going on in a lot of people's lives and a lot of people's business lives and things. And they don't want to come to terms with it. They don't want, I'm way too much a reflection of that. I mean, for some people, they want to hear the story because like I'll speak to law classes or I'll speak to business school classes. At the end of next month, I'm speaking to Emory Law, for example, on Zoom. And it's kind of a cautionary tale kind of story in a way, or it is a cautionary tale story, but with business people or socially in a town like Greenwich or something like that, a lot of people. And also, there had been a 12-page article about my wife and me in Greenwich magazine, and so like when you turn the page, there's like a headshot of me in Greenwich magazine, and then 12 pages about my story, and pictures of me and pictures of Lynn and pictures of everything, and for years, like I would walk into a restaurant and and you could just feel people like looking at me and pointing at me, and the weird thing is that the only restaurants we could afford was a diner. So like people, there's no question that there was a barrier, but not in the rooms of AA, not in recovery. And frankly, those were the only people in Greenwich I knew anymore. But over time, it shifted again, where I was kind of reinvited into some degree of polite society.
What do you want the biggest lesson to be from your story for people listening? What do you want the takeaway to be?
It's like where I should turn to the camera and like talk right to the camera. This is the lesson. Okay. Here, I'll tell you, there's three things. Okay. If I had to give three takeaways, here they are, and not any particular order. Okay. 1, live within your means. Okay. I thought, like most entrepreneurs do, I thought every year was going to be better than the year before. And so that was true for everything. I was spending more money than I could possibly afford, and I fell into the trap. And by the way, just for those of you who've gotten like sucked into the SBA PPP loan thing, a lot of people, the way they got sucked in to the problem was that we were in a real upcycle of business, and nobody really expected the pandemic to come. So people were like expecting the next year to be better, and so they hadn't paid their taxes, or they were floating the 941s, and the 940s, basically floating the employee contributions and things like that. Think, no problem. By next April, I'll be able to pay it. Well, when the pandemic came, there was no next April, right? There was no next April, and then so they were caught with hundreds of thousands, if not more, and depending on your business, of obligations from the year before. So when this PPP money came out, and they really weren't given enough time to do their due diligence, to get their financial records, they were being told, for example, like, the money's going to run out. You got to get your application in right now. They jumped, but it was like a cure-all to solve the problems from the year before. And that wouldn't have happened if they were kind of living within their means. Pay your taxes, make payment, like live, like you don't need to have more than, and that was a rough lesson for me. And so that's 1, live within your means. 2 would be who you marry is the most important decision of your life. And for the people who are prosecuted for crimes, I can tell you that the divorce rate is much higher than the national divorce rate. And so for most of us, if we had good, solid relationships, and I'll take responsibility. I mean, like, most of us have became like really bad partners. Whoever we were when we met our wives and or significant others or spouses or whatever, maybe it had been 10 years or more that we were hyper focused on business and not on the being a good partner. And so when we were being asked either by society or by our bosses or even our own drive to like go over the line, I mean, what I wished I had been able to do, and what most guys I speak to wish they had been able to do, was like kind of go into the bedroom and say to their wives, "Listen, I'm being asked to do things that aren't like they're over the line, or this might not turn out well. So instead, let's simplify our lives. Let's sell the house. Let's get the kids out of private school. Let's dump the cars. Whatever it is, we can simplify our life instead of going deeper into this. And the reason why they don't, I think, is because they're afraid their wives are going to leave them, because there's not a lot of connection left. What they've done instead is that they think their wives are only in it for the money. And I have interviewed hundreds of the spouses, hundreds, and almost everyone has the same answer, that they would have liked nothing better than their husband to say they wanted their husband back, or they wanted their wife back if it was they wanted their spouse back. They missed having that life of, and the money was not a good substitute for the connection. But without having that, we're just thrown into the abyss. So that's number 2, right? It's like who you marry and how you treat that relationship is the most important thing in life. And the third thing is kind of like an internalization. What I learned in AA is to do the next right thing, okay? Every decision I make now, every single decision I make now is how will this decision improve my character and bring me closer to God? Now, I've done my best here not to like make this like a religious God thing. I'm not trying to convert anybody. It's not about that. But so many opportunities have come, so many. And for anybody, I mean, but time is our greatest asset. And the quicker I can say no to something that's a no, and just kind of like sort no, yes, no, yes, and not try to waste my time or make compromises trying to turn a no into a yes. I mean, how many times has that happened, Ian, right?
Yeah.
Right? I'd say, oh, but if only I do this, if only I do that. If it's a no, it's a no. Spend time on the yeses. And who knows? Maybe something will cycle back. Who knows? But life is too short to be focusing on the no's or to try to turn no's into yeses. And those yeses are always somehow about my own authenticity, about what's right for me, even if nobody else sees it. And it may not make as much money or it may not have that kind. It's just about what is right for me and my character or my pathology, putting my mental health first, putting my family's safety first. Put that first. And it's okay if I don't make as much money. I mean, I'm not in it for the money now really anyway, but if I were 20 years younger, I'd be having to make these decisions kind of more on the firing line. If you do the next right thing, the money will flow. If you do the wrong thing, then it's a ticking time bomb. So those would be the 3 things.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Jeff, for making the time to do this today. This was a wonderful interview, and I'm glad we got to meet and sit down to do this.
Ian, this has been fantastic. Thank you. You make it very, very easy.
Good. I'm glad you had a fun time.
Yeah, thanks.